Today I will try to persuade you to do your part to help end extreme poverty by first describing the circumstances of extreme poverty. Second, I'll discuss the most affected by these circumstances, and finally I'll inform you of some possible solutions to these issues. Extreme poverty is a result of an overall lack of basic necessities such as healthy food, clean water, sanitation, proper shelter, healthcare resources, education, and job opportunities. Other causes of poverty can stem from discrimination, exclusion, bad governance, conflict and crisis, a lack of access to social services, climate change, and often the cycle of poverty itself. Globally, insufficient nutrition causes 45% of death in children under 5 years old. Severe malnutrition is also the cause of stunted growth for millions of children. According to the United Nations, 4.5 billion people don't have access to safe sanitation, such as using a toilet, and 2 billion people currently lack access to quality water. Children born into poverty are nearly twice as likely to die before the age of 5 than families with stable incomes. In developing countries, half of all women do not receive the health care that they need. Here you can see a little girl who's 8 years old. She was in Syria and there was a bombing, and she is using tin cans, like soup cans, for prosthetics because she doesn't have any way to walk otherwise, and she obviously wouldn't have the money for prosthetics. So things like this are happening all the time, and it's really very, very sad. Nobody should have to live that way, especially a child. 840 million people worldwide also have no access to electricity. Most of them live in rural areas of the developing world. Even without tuition fees, many families can't afford potential costs of education such as uniforms, books, supplies, exam fees, anything that may come up. While other children are unable to receive an education because of conflict in their area, natural disasters, destroyed infrastructures, and limited resources. Some families living in poverty often have to choose between sending their children to school or providing for other basic needs. Many children are forced to stay home to help with chores or take care of relatives. Many children also need to work from a young age to support their families. More than 1/5 of children under age 5 in developing countries live in extreme poverty. Children are most at risk in rural regions and in countries undergoing violent conflict or political instability. Around 46% of those living in poverty are children under the age of 14. Gender inequality is more prevalent in low-income countries, and women are more likely to be impoverished than men because they're less likely to have opportunities to receive an education, find work, or own property themselves. Women are often exposed to gender-based violence and are more likely to be forced into early marriage, limiting their ability to fully participate in society and benefit from economic growth. Elderly, indigenous people, refugees, and the mentally ill or those with disabilities are also especially vulnerable to extreme poverty. Here you can see these men are chained up, and it's because they're considered to be mentally ill and they don't have, any system set up to help them. So essentially when they deem them, of no use, here they're literally left to lay here with wood holding their legs down, and this man is chained around his wrists, his neck, and all that down to his feet and to the ground. A majority of the world's poorest populations live in rural and agricultural areas where they lack access to adequate education. They work in agriculture and are generally under the age of 18. The rural poverty rate is more than 3 times higher than the rate in an urban or suburban area. Education promotes economic growth. It provides skills that increase employment opportunities and income. Nearly 60 million people could escape poverty if all adults had just 2 more years of schooling. Investing in the women and men of developing countries is a vital way to increase food security and provide a source of nutrition for the poor, as well as offer food production for local and global markets. Better use of agricultural biodiversity can contribute to more nutritious diets, better livelihoods, and more sustainable farming systems for those communities. A profound change of the global food and agricultural system is needed if we're to nourish the 821 million people who are hungry today and the additional 2 billion people expected to be undernourished by 2050. In conclusion, as human beings, our well-being is linked to one another. More than 10% of the world's population lives in extreme poverty. Those living in poverty experience deprivations that prevent them from realizing their rights and perpetuate their poverty. Inequality, unsafe housing, lack of nutritious food, clean water, unequal access to justice, lack of political power, and limited access to education and healthcare should be available to all. In order to end poverty, governments, world leaders, humanitarian organizations, and everybody with the ability to help must invest in early childhood education programs, schools, healthcare, sanitation, prenatal services, especially in the areas with the largest populations of people living in extreme poverty. Investments in agricultural issues are crucial to increasing sustainable food production systems to help alleviate the cycle of poverty. And as a final thought, at the greatest levels of affluence and the deepest levels of poverty, parents share the same desire for their children to have a better future and, of course, just have their basic needs met. So I hope you'll consider that. Thank you.